Okay. So my name is Patricia Cardozo, and I'm the Associate Director for the Center of Student Engagement Activities. And I want to welcome our Chief Compliance Officer of Diversity Ethics as well at National University, Matt Medeiros, speaking on public policy and citizenry. It's really great to have him here, and I just want to thank him for supporting students and student engagement in this way. And then I'll pivot over to Julia, who has a really great intro for him.
Thank you, Patricia. So again, my name is Julia McMillan. I'm a staff member here at National University, the coordinator of NU Scholars Program, and I also support Center for Student Engagement and Activities. I'd love to tell y'all a little bit about Matt Medeiros. Matt is a higher education regulatory affairs executive specializing in organizing, directing, and implementing compliance-related projects, programs, and policies. As Chief Compliance, Diversity, and Ethics Officer at the National University System, Matthew currently oversees all federal and state regulatory affair efforts for affiliate universities in the system. That's a lot. He's also provided consultation and training for several institutional boards and senior leadership on Title IX, state authorization, and lots of other compliance-related topics. Matt's got over a decade of experience in higher ed and has held positions in Title IX offices, student affairs, policy and project management, student services, academic records, compliance, political external affairs. Matt has previously served as the senior compliance officer at both TCS Education in Chicago and Alliant International University in San Diego, California. He has also held positions working for the City of Boston and for the Trade Association. So we're really excited to welcome Matt here. He's got a wealth of broad expertise, and we're really excited to hear him speak a little bit to public policy and citizenry. Thank you so much for joining us, Matt.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. Yeah, it's a good intro. I'm not sure I can live up to that, but I'll do my best. I will tell you that public policy is a passion of mine. And so today's really an examination of the intersection between citizenry and public policy, and what does that intersection look like, and how do we move forward as a modern society. So really, just to kind of set the stage for what we're going to be speaking about, I wanted to talk about what good citizenship is. And really it comes down to good citizenship is the foundation of a healthy democracy. If you have American citizens or citizens of any country in the world that are engaged, that are communicating, that are interacting within their communities, within their country and the rest of the globe, then you will have a democracy that is active and healthy. If not, there will always be stumbling blocks. And we can talk about that a little bit later in the presentation. I think the stage I want to set too is to understand some unique challenges that we have. And one has been going on for a period of time, and one is fairly new. One is how technology and our very technology around communication has changed the ways we interact with people. From social media to the internet to remote working, which is what we're doing right now. It has really changed the aspects and created a more diverse, nuanced, and complex citizenry that have to learn how to reconnect with each other. On top of that, we're going through COVID-19. And so we're in a unique world where we can't be around one another. And that presents, I think, some unique challenges to both our public policy and being a good citizen. So with that said, this is a little overview of what we're going to touch on. We're going to be hitting a few more things. The key aspect I would highlight here is that the primary responsibility of a democratic citizen is concerned with the development of shared interests that lead to understanding the repercussions of their actions on other citizens. So the idea is that if you're a good democratic citizen, you are always thinking about what are our shared interests as a community and how do my actions impact that? And if you care about it, you can generally get to good policy. So let's dive in a little bit. And what I wanted to do is not just assume that we all have the same understanding of what being a citizen is, or has been, I should say, in this case. And what I wanted to highlight is that it's evolved over time. So in the US, our understanding of what it means to become a citizen predates the Constitution, a lot of European influences on it. And really, when we formed as a country, we left it to the states to decide who were their citizens. I wanted to go even earlier in the world about that and talk about, well, what does citizen come from? And it comes from civitas, which is a Latin term meaning city. And so the idea of the first time somebody using a word like this was meaning you lived in a city. And with the ancient Greeks, that meant that you were participating in some way through public affairs. The kind of ideal of a Greek argument of this kind of reasoned debate and discussion underpins a lot of our American founders' understanding of what a democracy can be. And so, like I said, it was left to the states. And of course, we're talking at a time when what we're really talking about for a big chunk of our history is white male landowners, and that's it. And we'll get into the amendments and what that looks like. What I was initially going to do was kind of ask if, well, what do folks think about what the definition of citizen would be today? And while I'm open to suggestions, I would posit this idea. Is a citizen somebody who votes? Is a citizen somebody who talks about politics? Or is a citizen just meaning you have the access and the right to do so? And so if anybody on the call wants to jump in, feel free. I want to open it to the folks on the call. But I'm interested to know if you guys have a main idea, thesis about what a citizen today really means. If there's a definition you'd want to add. Bashful.
Yeah, I don't think I have anything different. I think the idea of community and being someone who contributes those shared values within a community is pretty spot on to what I view a citizen as today. So I don't think I would add anything different or change anything. I would just say that it's definitely a really sensitive time as we kind of talk through what it really means to be a citizen and what that has meant with, you know, the systemic problems that we're finally facing now. And so I think that it's pretty spot on that idea of city and community is there. That's how I see it.
Yeah, I think that's reasonable, right? I think if you look at it through a modern lens, right, it's not a city per se, it's our communities. And those communities look different depending on where you're from and how you grew up, but they're all communities. There's all that group of shared interests that you have that go beyond just what you're doing and how you're impacting others. I put this little bonus down there, idiotes. You know, in Athenian democracy, an idiot was considered somebody who only concerned themselves with their private affairs, not with the public good. And so in that era and time, they believed idiots were born and citizens were made. And really, they were made through education. And so I highlight that because refusing to be a citizen in many ways, both in ancient times and now, means you avoid politics and debate. You avoid the discussions that can be difficult. You avoid the participation aspects that we're going to delve into. And what are the repercussions of that on our public policy? So we're not the first people to consider this and talk about this. And so I wanted to give you a few quotes that I think highlight some of the current challenges that we have and challenges that have always existed as you try to get through people's innate passivity, through our innate human nature to be selfish, and what that looks like from a citizen perspective. So I'm not one to read off a slide often. My old business professors would be very mad at me, but there's two I'll highlight here because I think they're particularly poignant nowadays. And I'll start with Robert H. Jackson, which was an attorney general in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. It is not the function of our government to keep the citizen from falling into error. It is the function of the citizen to keep the government from falling into error. And I think what we're trying to highlight in this quote is the idea that a lot of times, I think in our common discourse that we have, we often blame politicians and we blame people that are in positions of power, and that's not completely unfair. At the same time, as a representative democracy, we put them there. And so I think it bears thought and insight into yourself of how do we get there? How do we improve our government? Well, the only way is by participating. And with that, I will say right to the next, from an American journalist around the same period of time, bad officials are elected by good citizens who do not vote. And we're going to delve into participation. So these are just some quotes I wanted to help kind of illustrate the mosaic of the citizen challenges that have existed both in the past and I think through today. So those are definitions, but definitions don't define meaning. And so I wanted to spend a little bit of time delving into, well, what does that look like today? And I think Ryan, you spoke to it well. I think some of the predecessors that we were talking about get there as well. Really what it means is being part of a community and being connected to that community. And so I took this from the partnership from 21st Century Skills. I thought they have some really great papers on being an active, modern, engaged citizen. And what you'll note is that they have kind of three buckets, and I reframe them a little bit into what I would think of the three biggest areas. The number one first absolute foundational piece of being a good citizen is being informed. And really that's through civic literacy, right? So you can never you can never engage well with your community, with politics, with your representative government, if you don't understand the things that you're talking and voting about. And so the only way to get there is to have high civic literacy and understanding of how our system works and the issues that are currently being faced by the citizenry. The second piece of that is, now that you know and you understand the system, your willingness to participate, right? That's that engagement piece of the puzzle. Because you can know all the information in the world, but if you're not willing to engage, we're never going to take the next step. And that next step is, how do you become a digital citizen? How do you take action and positively influence both the local, state, national, and international community? So I wanted this to be the meaning that underpins what we talk about, because I think it engages the three pillars of a modern citizen in a way that allows us to understand how to move forward. And if at any point anybody has questions, feel free to jump in and ask. I'm always open. With that said, I am going to attempt to show you a brief TED Talk that I think speaks to one of the modern challenges of this, which is, how are you a citizen in a full international community? So with that, I will stop sharing for 1 second so we can see all your nice faces. And I'm going to close this. And then if I do this well, I will let you guys see a TED Talk in a second. And let's see how this goes. Okay, and share. Can you guys see my screen okay? Anybody see my screen? If there's nodding, I can't see. Okay, thumbs up. Thank you.
Oh, yes, yes, yes.
Okay. All right, let's see if you can hear the audio.
So I don't hear audio. If you do share computer sound, when you do the share screen, there's a little toggle button that should enable that.
You are, as usual, 100% correct. Okay, round two. Here we go.
I want to introduce you to an amazing woman. Her name is Davinia. Davinia was born in Jamaica, emigrated to the US at the age of 18, and now lives just outside of Washington, D.C. She's not a high-powered political staffer, nor a lobbyist. She'd probably tell you she's quite unremarkable, but she's having the most remarkable impact. What's incredible about Davinia is that she's willing to spend time every single week focused on people who are not her, people not in her neighborhood, her state, nor even in her country, people she'd likely never meet. Davinia's impact started a few years ago when she reached out to all of her friends on Facebook and asked them to donate their pennies so she could fund girls' education. She wasn't expecting a huge response, but 700,000 pennies later, she's now sent over 120 girls to school. When we spoke last week, she told me she's become a little infamous at the local bank every time she rocks up with a shopping cart full of pennies. Now, Davinia is not alone. Far from it. She's part of a growing movement, and there's a name for people like Davinia: global citizens. A global citizen is someone who self-identifies first and foremost not as a member of a state, a tribe, or a nation, but as a member of the human race, and someone who's prepared to, thank you, and someone who's prepared to act on that belief to tackle our world's greatest challenges. Our work is focused on finding, supporting, and activating global citizens. They exist in every country and among every demographic. I want to make the case to you today that the world's future depends on global citizens. I'm convinced that if we had more global citizens active in our world, then every single one of the major challenges we face, from poverty, climate change, gender inequality, these issues become solvable. They are ultimately global issues, and they can ultimately only be solved by global citizens demanding global solutions from their leaders. Now, some people's immediate reaction to this idea is that either it's a bit utopian or even threatening. So I'd like to share with you a little of my story today, how I ended up here, how it connects with Davinia, and hopefully with you.
So I wanted to share that with you because I think in that talk, and I recommend finishing it if you're interested, she's an amazing story. I think what you're going to see is three things that we're going to touch on later in this presentation. The first, of course, is taking the power yourself. Like he said at the beginning, Davinia is not somebody who was born into power or privilege. She saw something that wasn't being done and she acted on it herself. Second part is the self-sacrifice piece that I think we touched on earlier. And the third part is the global citizen, understanding that the things that we try to solve don't have the artificial borders that we often talk about, be they city, state, or country. We talk about climate change, we talk about poverty, they're not limited to one place. And so I think that speaks to the type of modern challenges we have as a global citizen when, if you think back to, and I'll always call them ancient times, but I think we can all kind of understand what I'm getting at. A lot of times it was just your local community. Those are the things that were going to impact you. The world was not as connected and powered together in the same way. And so because we have those challenges, then we have to now understand that we have to engage with even more people with different backgrounds and different beliefs. But we always have shared interests. We always want to have clean air and water. We always don't want to see people starving to death. And so these are the connections, and we're going to talk about building bridges later, spoiler alert. But that's what it's all about. It's about understanding and connecting yourself to your community and how that can bridge the gap in a politicized and sometimes fragmented community. So with that said, now that I've used the TED Talk to help me articulate something better than I could, I'm going to go back to sharing my screen if you give me 1 minute. And then I'm going to go to, here we go. Now you're seeing it from behind the curtain, what it looks like on my side. Okay. So now that we've had kind of a global citizenship talk, I wanted to talk about, well, what are some of the key aspects of being a good citizen, right? And I think Davinia represents this in a lot of ways, but I think we kind of touched on it, but I wanted to walk through it together. What do you need to have to be a happy, healthy, engaged global citizen? Well, the number one thing you absolutely have to have is you have to be honest. And what I mean by honesty is not just honest with your peers, but honest with yourself. Why are things the way they are? There's an education aspect to that, but there's an aspect to being willing to learn. There's an aspect to being willing to question the things that you were brought up with. There's an aspect of that about not being willing to lie to yourself or to your community. There's an honor to that. And inherently, when we talk about public policy, when we talk about shared interests, that means what? Inevitably, somebody is going to have to sacrifice. If you are unwilling to sacrifice as a citizen, you will never get to the place where you can work together on shared interests, because what are you going to do? You're going to prioritize your wants and needs. You're going to go right to where our human nature is, which is, what about me? Of course, you have to be law abiding. If you respect a society, then you will abide by the rules. And if you don't like the rules, you will actively engage to change them. Active participation. We're going to talk about this a little bit, right? It's not just voting. It's advocating, it's demonstrating, it's discussing. I bet you there's a lot of people that are watching this that'll say, I know somebody in my life who tells me you never talk about three things. You don't talk about family, you don't talk about religion, and you don't talk about politics. Well, unfortunately, those are three very important things. And if you will not engage with people who disagree with you, who have different beliefs than you, then how are you ever going to grow and learn? How will we ever find common ground from people coming from different places? I don't think it's possible. You have to be well-informed and knowledgeable. We talked about that, right? Education underpins everything we need to do. If you don't know anything, if you don't understand the issues that we face, how can we problem solve and find common ground, find solutions together? Open-mindedness, that goes back to the honesty piece. You have to be open-minded, be willing to give someone else's idea a try. And then, of course, you have to contribute economically. And this has been something we talk about forever, right? No taxation without representation. You got to pay the bills. You got to keep the lights on. Right? Do you expect your home to be well maintained? If you don't pay your mortgage, you don't pay your rent? Of course not. You have to put in the economic contribution. We have to empower people to have the ability to do that. And that's good public policy. And that's something we'll talk about later. So I didn't want to go any farther in the presentation without acknowledging something that is changing what this presentation would have been if it didn't exist. I am talking to you over Zoom. You are looking at me over Zoom. I'm sorry. It's not a more attractive person to do this for you. We have COVID-19 challenges. It is changing the world that we live in. It really is, in every aspect. I couldn't list everything here. I wanted to list things that I think impact people's citizenry. And the number one thing is health impacts. If your health isn't there, what else can you care about? You're not going to care about the election. You're not going to care about anything else. If you're not healthy, you can't help anybody, including yourself. And I mean that holistically, not just you're sick with COVID-19 or ill. Talking about the mental illness. Think about being quarantined all this time. Has it impacted us? Absolutely. There's 1,000 studies I could show you showing the impacts of COVID on anxiety, depression, loneliness. That leads to social discontent. We're also in a time during COVID where we're going through a real cultural shift, a real conversation about race in a country that was built on a lot of problems with race. And at the same time, when you're trying to participate in all the things that we've talked about, oh, you can't be close to people. You got to wear a mask. P.S., while all of that's going on, as though that's not stressful enough for the fine people of the world, you may have lost your job. And now your number one concern is, how do I put food on the table? Does that impact the social dynamics and how you engage? Absolutely. I think it's changed the expectations about what matters, about how we engage, both personally and professionally, and it leads to a lot of fear. And in general, while I don't have time to do a presentation on fear, is when human beings act out of fear, we generally act pretty poorly. We don't act in our best selves. We're reacting. We're not acting, we're reacting. And I think you see that as COVID underpins all of this. Another aspect I didn't want to avoid is the fact, and I mentioned this at the top of the presentation, when we're talking about voting, a lot of people on this call didn't have the right to vote. If you weren't a man, nope. If you weren't white, nope. If you didn't own land, nope. You're out. Sorry, thanks for playing. And I don't have time to walk through the amendments. I recommend civics course. There's lots of interesting things you can talk about, but I do want to highlight the fact that when we look at voting and we look at engagement and we look at somebody engaging as a modern citizen, they didn't always have the access. And by the way, there's a lot of these amendments. The 15th stands out to me because, you think, oh, 15th Amendment, no matter what race you are, you can vote. No. States started putting in place all kinds of stuff, literacy tests, taxes. I mean, they would come up with anything to stop people from voting. You see it today. If you put on a news channel right now, you will see impediments to voting today, 2020. Think about that. This isn't the 1870s or the 1920s. It's 2020. And so I didn't want to move forward and not acknowledge the fact that the impediments and barriers to participation are real. They are absolutely real. And so how does that play out? Well, I don't like to spend a lot of time staring at graphs, but I'll tell you the secret. Best case scenario, 60% of people vote. That's the long and short of it. As access has gone up, what has participation really done? About flatline. I mean, it goes like this. It's like a stock market. It doesn't really move that much. Why? Again, a lot of impediments to voting, whether it's voter discontent, apathy, which I think we could spend, again, another presentation on. People being disallowed to vote. I'll use an example. In Florida, felons were given the right to vote, and then Florida came back and said, well, actually, you have to pay all your bills first. Some people don't have the money to. They lose their democratic right to vote because of a bill. That's today. What I wanted to highlight is that while voter turnout in the US fluctuates in national elections, basically you see if there's a presidential election, always more people participate. Essentially what happens is if it's a midterm, it's about 40, and if it's a presidential, it's about 60. Think about that. That's a lot of people not participating. That's a lot of people whose voice is not being counted. I think you'd find that's unacceptable. So, well, what does that mean, right? I'm just giving you one country. Well, I wanted to show you this chart. Bad news, we are not at the top of it. Now, in fairness, if you see an asterisk somewhere, that means there's a national law that makes compulsory voting, which I don't think you'd ever see in an American democracy. So some of them have there, but notice not everybody at the top has an asterisk. It's engagement. It's access, so overcoming these institutional barriers that have stopped people from voting and participating, but it's also motivation, right? It's education. It's moving past ignorance and past apathy to true engagement. And that's the only way you get there. Canada's 91%. That was 2015. I think Sweden's 96%. Slovakia's like 99%, something like that. So it's not like we're close. We are not killing it, and we need to do better. So that's a lot of stuff. I think the best way to think about how modern citizenry can engage in positive public policies to understand that these are not one-offs. These are not just things that exist on their own. They are interconnected. And so if you remember the 3 pillars we talked about early, this is how everything connects. Education, which is what we do in our business as a school, is essential. And I don't just mean at the higher education, I mean the whole way up, from preschool till your graduate terminal degree. What we need to educate people about is civic literacy, which is knowledge of government, the role of citizens, how to leverage your skills and disposition to participate effectively. What are the government processes that allow you to participate? And what are the global implications of that participation? How do you exercise your rights and your obligations as a citizen at every level, local, state, and national? How do you stay informed? You do that by teaching people from the beginning and making sure that we think of citizenship as a privilege, as something a lot of people died and fought for. Through our entire history, throughout the entire history of time, this has been true. You educate so that there's an understanding of how it works, and people feel an innate responsibility that they need to use this privilege to positively impact not just themselves, but their community. And that's where activity comes in. It's voting, and voting is important, and we'll always talk about voting, and I'm gonna pitch you on registering to vote at the end of this, because I want everyone to vote. I want you to learn, and then I want you to vote. I want you to educate yourself and then vote. And then you pick what you think is best for your community. But participation is more than that, right? It's calling your state and local politicians. It's writing people that will advocate on behalf of issues that you're passionate about. It's engaging in conversation with friends and family. It's protesting when appropriate. Those are all forms of activity. And if you do that, if you have informed citizens who bear a great understanding, a sense of responsibility, who are willing to participate, then you can have transformation. Then you can have a group of people come together to show their values through policy, because that's what policy is. You can go to fancy policy school. I got my graduate degree in it, and that's what you learn. Policy shows what you value in a society, what we as a community believe in, and what we're willing to resource towards it. And that's how you get transformation. I want to take a minute. I want to open it up to a lot of me talking, I'm sorry, and talk about values, because none of this happens without values. There's a fun little word form I put here of things that I think you need to have, but I'm curious what values folks on the phone think you need to have in order to be a good citizen. What being a good citizen is bound up in from a society's core values perspective. What do folks think?
I would really love to weigh in, Matt, and it's such a rich conversation, and I really appreciate you sharing this. And something that I've been sort of turning over in my head while we've been talking is I moved to San Diego from Germany. I'm American, but I moved here from Germany, and of course, Germany has very different laws regarding citizenship than the United States does, and has this presence of large numbers of folks who may be second, third, fourth generation, but are not citizens. Yet at the same time, it's a country that really values civic literacy and civic participation. So in typical fashion, I don't have like a clear, I'm just like a mess of ideas, but I think it was just really, it was just really interesting to think about what is citizenship, because I think as an American, my first thought is it's about, I was born here. There's just such a strong association with birthright and a sense of immediate belonging. And I think, I do think that for Americans, there is an emphasis on it's a right, and on the benefit of citizenship is what I feel like I hear emphasized more. Whereas I feel like in countries where it's, where maybe citizenship is has a different pathway, maybe there's more of an emphasis on participation and on what you need to give as a citizen. Gosh, I didn't really answer the question in terms of values, but I guess I just mean to say that it seems like the values of citizenship really vary so much based on the context and based on kind of the laws that are defining citizenship for that group.
Yeah, I think you answered the question wonderfully. I think you're exactly right. I mean, I'll use American values. What do we always talk about? Freedom, right? You may have heard that a few times from a few politicians in your life, right? What else? What is the American dream? Is the American dream being the best person to everybody in the world? No. It's about ownership. The American dream is getting married, having kids, and owning a home. Making enough money to go on vacation once or twice a year, right? Well, what are our cultural values in that lens? Well, it's property ownership. It's wealth creation. It's the idea that you will come here and move your life up. I mean, I'll speak about, my family. That's what they came here for. They came from the islands of the Azores, from Ponta Delgada, San Miguel. And they came from Italy. And they came because they were dirt poor and they're like, in America, we could do better. And by better, they meant they could create wealth. That's an underpinning of who we are, right? A bunch of people from Boston, where I'm from, they threw a bunch of tea into the ocean because they were like, I'm sick of paying taxes if you don't let me vote. We need to participate. If I'm going to give you money, you need to let me dictate how that money is spent. Thomas Paine wrote an amazing treatise on common sense about the basic minimalism of what government should do from his opinion. And you see that. You'll see that in libertarianism today. Still foundational. Puritan values absolutely permeate modern society. I bring it up because I think the lens that Julia's talking about is important. Understanding our American twist on it. And then understanding your family's twist on it. Right? Understanding how you were raised and how that instills values to you. And most of those are going to be good. Some of them are going to be a little not so good or just different than other people. And how do you connect? How do you build a bridge to somebody whose values are different? Well, what you have to find is common values. What you have to find are areas of agreement. And that's the only way you get to policy. There's no other way to get there. And that's really what the next slide's about. The next slide is about how do we build that bridge? I think if you look at the American environment today, particularly today, I think either side of the aisle, no matter where you come from, would admit this is not where we're at. People are not reaching out their hands and saying, I know we disagree, but let's find a commonality. Let's compromise. Let's each make some sacrifice, negotiate, and have the courage to stand by that negotiation. And I'm going to be open-minded. Even though I've thought this way before, I'm going to listen and I'm engaged to what you're telling and I am solutions-oriented. Sounds great. That is essentially statesmanship. We do not have it. It does not exist in the modern era. At least it does not exist in a widespread way. The only way you get to building bridges, the only way you get to policy solutions is by following these guidelines. If you don't have all of this, and by courage, I mean both political and personal courage, you cannot get there because compromise is politics. Compromise is policy. It's not just what I want. It's understanding what you want and what we want and what values we want to promote with our policy. And then and only then can we come to agreement. But it's not all bad. Where there is challenge, there is opportunity. And you'll see I really emphasize education here for obvious reasons. This is just me, so this is just my hat. I think the key to being successful is ensuring we have strong civics education in our country. And what I mean by that is everything we've talked about, what it means to be a citizen, the responsibility and privilege of it, the sacrifice, the history of it, the systemic challenges and barriers people have faced historically, understanding the current rules and regulations. On top of that, I think in a modern society, you need to have cross-cultural, it says skills and values. You need to understand not everybody's going to think the way you think, and you need to be okay with it. That is America. I'll give you one of my family's values. I was always told in my family, to be an American means you will scream at the top of your lungs to defend someone's ability to shout something you don't believe. You need to know voting rights and responsibilities. I think another key part of civics, because we talk about compromise and sacrifice and finding commonalities, communication skills. Raise your hand if you know people with bad communication skills. I had them for a while. History bears to be taught in a civics vein so that we will not repeat the mistakes of the past. And then imagine this, imagine actually teaching people in school about issues, modern day issues, climate change, poverty, healthcare, you name it, national security and defense. Oh, and while you're teaching all of that, you need to modernize the curriculum and talk about how you navigate the digital world. How you don't just look at your phone, how you can get yourself other opinions, how you can go to sources that maybe you wouldn't normally go to and hear as many sides of an argument as possible to see what resonates with you, to identify where the data and where the information is and what you see about what you want to promote from a value perspective. And through that, we can encourage everybody to participate and register and follow the news and read a newspaper article occasionally. But the most important thing, and where I think our greatest gap is today, and thus the greatest opportunity, is to emphasize that every single piece of this, to be respectful of your fellow citizens and to deal with them in a civil way. We don't shout each other down. We don't call people names because we don't agree with them. We don't demean others because they don't think the way that we think. The only way a democracy functions sustainably and healthy is when there is mutual respect and civility between people that do not agree. Because I'll tell you a secret, we're never going to agree. And that's good. A lot of minds will always come up with a better solution than one mind. Next steps. I want us to talk about that together. I've given my next steps. I am open to what people think are other next steps that we need to take, because I really do believe that our possibilities to really forge this country into what it was meant to be still exists today and is still absolutely attainable if we work together. And so with that, let me pause. Let's hear another voice. I'm open. What other steps do you think we can take as a society to help push ourselves forward and get a more healthy democracy?
So I would agree that I think education is absolutely key. So some of the thoughts popping into my head listening through this presentation is like, I've thought for years, like, man, we could so revamp our education system, especially, and I think key years are those like grades 9 through 12, where you have young adults, and that's what they are, young adults, preparing to enter the world. And I really think that those years should be focusing on things that we assume are being taught at home, like balancing a budget to live, right? To live and not live on credit. Yeah. Things like that. And really thinking like, oh, they'll figure it out, they'll learn it in college. Well, what if they don't go to college, right? Because there are trades and there are several other things you can do to contribute to society by not having to go to college to do it. So just first revamping that whole education system, I think is something that I think a lot of people tend to agree with, but we don't ever seem to get anywhere with it, I feel like. It's a good buzzword and then it dies out. And then not stopping there and really continuing on in higher education as well, and making sure that institutions of higher education are not, you know, my professor isn't here to tell me what to think, but to provide me with resources and guide myself and my development within a discipline so that I can create my own thoughts with sound values behind it and then enter the workforce, because we see that generational differences really just take our country in different directions, and there's not necessarily anything inherently wrong with that, but the underlying thing there are values, and where are those values coming from? We would love to see it come from home, but they don't always. So where else does it come from? So I think that I would agree that education is key, and it starts early. And I wish we could see more headway with that and not just have that conversation die out every few years.
Yeah, I think that's a great point.
I want to throw something in because I really like what Ryan was talking about. And I think another important point is decolonizing the curriculum and recentering it on underserved or underrepresented voices that have contributed to the American fiber and economy in ways that have gone really unacknowledged throughout the US educational system in K-12. I remember when I first read W.E.B. Du Bois, I had to get to high school to do it. And he was one of the most critical African-American thinkers of the time, at that time in the, Harlem Renaissance. And, and to only read a couple of books senior year of high school to even discuss the Harlem Renaissance, even though that was the only Renaissance the US has ever had, and to discuss a multicultural curriculum as well, because when we're talking about citizenry and who is a citizen, a lot of these narratives have really not been highlighted in any real curriculum unless you're taking certain specialized courses, even in college, that are regulated to underfunded departments such as African American studies, women's studies, ethnic studies, etc. Right. So I think that when we're talking about, who gets to be a citizen, reframing that conversation to really talk about the people who have been citizens and who have been here a long time, and giving those narratives, time in the curriculum, and really looking at them in a critical way, would be, really helpful to thinking about how this country was built and who contributed to it and who's already been a citizen for a very long time. And I know, even acknowledging that, on this Zoom call, we are on Kumeyaay land, some of us, right, at this university, and I think that's important too. And I'm curious, Javier, if you wanted to weigh in as well. But it's okay if you don't.
Yeah, I'd be happy to throw in if Javier isn't able to join us with his mic. Yeah, oh man, such a thought-provoking discussion. I think I got really excited, Matt, when you had the slide up about opportunities and you were talking about the curriculum, and it was such a great kind of a little mini light bulb moment for me, because I've been one of the projects I've been working on. I know we're talking a lot about curricula, and of course, National University is very, as our students on the call know, it's all about kind of a lean, targeted curriculum for working adults. It's all about like, what do you need to know to succeed? We want to respect your time, and kind of helping folks to develop curricula that are lean and are professionally focused, but are also really inclusive, and kind of building literacy with the instructional designers to say, like, this doesn't need to be a value add. This doesn't need to be an extra module. This is just a lens that you can see through to get the same lean targeted goals done, that I think often, because we have this limited perspective, we see as that's outside of the goal. Like, this is about finance. This isn't about historical educational inequity or something. So it was just really thought-provoking for me to see, it never occurred to me to think, like, how is civics embedded as another, you've got a lens about gender or race or religion, or all of these different kind of identities that students might bring. So it was just really thought-provoking to think, I never thought about how do we add civic engagement and civic literacy as another lens. And kind of as a case in point for me about how, if I hadn't been to this talk, I would have never even thought about adding that to the lenses of building a really lean but really, really effective curriculum.
Yeah, I think those are all fantastic points. When I think about, and I'm going to stop sharing because I'll tell you a secret. The next slide just says question. It's always easier to see faces, so I don't talk over anybody. Ryan, I think you bring up a really good point, and it was something that was, you made me think about the debate, or the debates. There's been two, I should say. And it's important because I think you bring up something I didn't include in my presentation I think is important, which is logic and sound judgment about what people are saying and why they're saying it. And I think that's a part of civics. I think being able to understand, I think the term you used was a straw man argument. You need to know that so that you can analyze and ascertain, why is somebody saying this? What are they trying to appeal to me in saying that? Is that fair? Is it a straw man argument, right? Cognitive dissonance, which I think we've seen from many politicians over the years. Being able to analyze those moments allows you to be an informed citizen. I thought it was a fantastic point I wanted to point out. Patricia, I think you're right. I think when we talk about history, how many of us had history that was robust, that talked about the many things you talked about? I'm going to guess none. Not to age myself, but you can see the grace, right? And Julia, I really appreciate what you're saying too, because I think you're talking about a value issue, in my mind, which is we want to be lean, and being lean is good, right? We want to give students the most pragmatic education that they need as a working adult to get the best job, and that is a good value. We need to also value teaching them the skills they need to be a good citizen, and I think that's been lost. You know, something I couldn't embed because I could do a whole thing on it is financial literacy. I think a lot of our problems is we don't teach financial literacy to anybody, right? If you can't put food on the table, if you can't pay the rent, anything we're talking about, as important as it is, goes out the window. If you're hungry, it doesn't matter. And I think that these are things that we need to start thinking about, and that's the way we go there. So with that, I will stop speaking. You've heard more than enough of my bad accent and mispronunciation. I will just say, are there any questions or anything that anybody wants to talk about before we close, and just say thank you for your time.
Well, Matt, I'm happy to throw in a question, but maybe this is too large of one for the 3 minutes we have left this evening. Something I was really wrestling with throughout your talk is, you know, your real emphasis on how, and you had a couple of wonderful quotes, and I don't have a good enough memory to recall those, you know, but how it's incumbent on citizens to choose the government that they deserve and to participate. And, you know, I often think when there's a politician in power whom I disagree with, I say, well, they didn't get here by themselves. Like, people had to vote for them and they had to not vote for someone else. So anyone can run for office, but you can only win if you get votes. And I think, as you know, as somebody who I recognize is very privileged, you know, I've never had to wait to cast a ballot more than 45 minutes or something. And that would have been, oh my goodness, how extreme. I've never had any sort of barrier in terms of the identification I needed. You know, I went to public schools, but I went to okay ones, and I've had some civic training. So I was wondering if you could kind of speak to, yes, we need to ask a lot of citizens, and how we can do that while also acknowledging that different folks face different barriers to participating.
Yeah, I think it's a wonderful question. You're right. We don't have enough time. I will highlight. I think where I try to get at it, and Patricia was talking about this as well, we have to recognize the structural barriers we have in place. And we mentioned a couple. We talked about voter suppression, voter disenfranchisement. You just made me think of a couple more. Gerrymandering. Real thing. Happens, right? You carve out a thing, boop, we know who we're getting. Like, why is it shaped like a kidney bean? Because that's what they want, because it guarantees a W, right? And vote, I mean, it's beyond voter suppression, right? I mean, we're in a race right now where vote by mail is 100% under attack. You could actually participate, and there is a chance you won't be counted, which goes against the very nature of democracy, right? And then we have to understand that there are people that can't vote because they don't have a car to go, and it's too far away. Or they're working 3 jobs. They don't have time because their job won't give them time off, right? So you're 1,000% right. We have structural impediments. Great idea. Why do we work on election day? I can't figure it out. Never made any sense to me, right? It's a big deal. Probably should let people do it. May pay them, right? What about people that don't have cars? Well, why isn't there a polling place closer? Why don't we have a minimum distance so that people can walk or roll or however the hell we got to get them there? Let's make sure it's ADA compliant. Let's do it. That's real. You know, where I grew up, there was a church group that used to pick people up. And they did it because a lot of elderly people where I grew up didn't have any vehicle transportation or family to help them, right? So I think you bring up great points. You're right. I can't nearly give it the time it deserves, but I think it's a fantastic point. And I think if we don't break down the structural barriers and impediments we have in place, we're never going to get to where we want to get to. Thank you to everybody for being here, to Patricia and Julia for setting it up. I always appreciate talking about these things are passions of mine. I think very important. So thank you guys for your time.
Thank you so much for joining us. This was really fantastic and a wonderful conversation. So thank you so much for your time.